You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move, from behind the scenes into the limelight.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Freight Famous, a podcast produced by Rose Rocket. My name is Winnie, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Rose Rocket. And today I'll be your guest host for this special 2022 recap episode. In this episode, we're going to bring you our favorite snippets of every episode that we produced in the last year. Think of this as your cheat sheet into some of our most important moments. Our normal scheduling is twice a month, and I promise that you'll see Justin soon again. Thank you so much for tuning in 2022. We set out to produce a podcast where the business side of trucking gets spotlighted, and we cannot believe how far we've come. So without further ado, let's jump in. Going back in time to January 2022, we had our first podcast ever, Ed Stockman, co-founder and CEO of Neutral. Ed and Justin talk about trucking entrepreneurship and building sales teams in the trucking and logistics industry. In this clip, Ed shares things that help make him successful as a freight broker and salesperson. And my favorite part is how Ed drills down on what truly is valuable to a customer.
When I'm talking about a plan of attack, I'm talking about lead generation, I'm talking about outreach, time zones. Are you calling people at the right time? Who are you calling? When and why? Know your value prop. Don't be another broker who's calling and pitching, single point of contact. You're my livelihood. How many times do shippers hear those same words out of every single freight broker that calls them? Have a real value prop. And in today's world, my opinion, one of the things or elements that I think contributed to my success as an individual contributor was I didn't want to sell me necessarily. I wanted to sell capacity because that's what people want to buy. It's tangible. It's real. It's a product. And I don't believe when there's tens of thousands of freight brokers out there calling these shippers that you're a real product. You're commoditized at that point. And how do you get away from that a little bit? And how do you have a little bit more of an analytical approach and give the shipper something that they're truly going to need? That's capacity. They don't need Ed. They don't need Justin. They don't need anyone in particular who's going to work really hard because their commission check is going to put food on their table and be able to support their family. They just need a truck. So let's go through the hard work. Let's understand their network. And let's compare that to our network and do a little bit of behind the scenes analytic work to understand how do we provide capacity to this particular shipper. And let's go in there and sell something real to them. So I think that was the foundation of my kind of value proposition, my self-value proposition. And then from there, it was really defining the leads, the personas, who I'm calling, when am I calling them, and just be incredibly disciplined with them.
Thank you, Ed, for being our first guest. Our next guest chats with Justin about how to grow a successful brokerage within a trucking company, something that we're seeing more and more often. Scott Oslin is the CEO of Gulf Relay, and in his next clip, he shares about how Gulf Relay has approached building their brokerage division while balancing the needs of both the brokerage and asset side of their business. Scott is extremely thoughtful around the change management required, from operations to managing culture, setting goals, and more.
How were you able to build a successful brokerage inside a trucking company?
It's a great question, and it's something the entire industry struggles with. And my perception is philosophically, the challenge really stems from a few different places. But I think you got to come back to the customer first. The customer is typically speaking, the customer wants us as the logistics company to figure it out, right? If you're going to contract on a lane for us between Atlanta and Dallas, it doesn't matter to the customer, typically speaking, whether you're taking it on brokerage or asset. They just want it covered and they want to make sure that it's taken care of. And they're using you because, typically speaking, because you have an asset. And so there's some reliability and there's perceived control there. And so that's part of it. But ultimately speaking, I think from the customer perspective, they expect you to figure it out. Inside the trucking company, you have a couple of different challenges. Typically, first of all, you have a cultural challenge. Again, if we go back to brokerage, brokerage is a sales job on either end. You're buying, you're selling a customer on giving you something, and then you're selling that something to somebody else, which is going to be a carrier. And so the personalities of salespeople, the motivations of salespeople, the comp structure of salespeople is very different from an asset-based trucking company. An asset-based trucking company, your measurements are typically on time. Your measurements are driver retention and making sure that those drivers get a steady paycheck. If my goal is to make a couple $1,000s a week, and I'm paid by the mile, well, then I need those miles, right? I need that. And so your job as a planner is to make sure that I get a balance of my home time and my miles in such a way that I can feed my family, but also see my family, right? And those two metrics and the kinds of people that gravitate towards those two different roles could not be more different. So I think right out of the gate, you have a cultural difference that's stark. And then I also think, lastly, some of the way that executives in brokerage look at the world versus the way executives or managers in assets look at the world is also different. If I'm in a brokerage world, my goal is to make sure my people, from a sales standpoint, are continuing to make commission and they're continuing to earn a bonus paycheck, because that's typically why they're there. They're salespeople, and most good salespeople's goal is to fulfill a customer need in such a way that they make money off of that, right? And usually they're comped and incentivized on that, and a heavy part of their compensation is variable because we want to see you perform that activity for us, right? On the asset side, the assets are all about options. An asset's dream world is a buffet, right? Oh, I have a driver who's in Atlanta today. Oh, I have Atlanta freight I can get for that driver. Oh, I have a driver who happened to be in St. Louis today. Oh, I have St. Louis freight I can get. And so some of the biggest challenges that we've had to work through internally has really been around the fact that the assets always want access to all of the freight that the brokerage has, because in their mind, a buffet is good. Brokerage wants to know what assets is going to let them move or what they can keep, because A, they want to make sure that they can continue to service that customer, and B, good carrier salespeople are looking for their value prop to the carrier, right? If I'm the carrier that we talked about earlier that goes from Atlanta to LA and then from LA back to Atlanta, if I have a wonderful lane from LA back to Atlanta and assets decides on a Tuesday that they've got a random driver in LA and they want that freight, well, that means my guy doesn't get the freight, right? Well, if that happens 2 or 3 times, then that guy doesn't call me anymore. And so my whole opportunity to add value to that carrier and potentially make, commission to feed my family and go to Disneyland or whatever I want to do, that's taken away. And so I think a lot of times people in companies where you own both a brokerage and a trucking company, they jump straight to the comp issue. And depending on your perspective, they tend to vilify that. And they say, well, either you just need to do this because it's for the good of the company. Usually, sometimes the asset group will say that to the brokerage, or vice versa. The brokerage will say, well, you guys just on the asset side, you never commit to anything, right? You're just always looking for the option. And neither is really true, right? Both are true depending on the situation. And so for us, we have found most success, to be really candid, in creating a defined network for both people. And we basically said, okay, assets, like this is your defined network. You're going to commit to these lanes on a regular basis. And so 90% of the freight that moves on our asset trucks today is committed capacity. Like they know up to a couple days ahead of time, and sometimes it's months ahead of time, you have to take these loads every single week. On the brokerage side, they own a core group of lanes and carriers that really defines their network, and then their value to the shipper is augmenting that with spot capacity, right? But we have found that to be most successful, and there's still a lot of loads that move from our brokerage to our assets and vice versa. But we've had to create a safe space where everybody understands that's not the majority of the freight that's happening. There's a defined network here, and we go outside of that. We have to agree on what that's going to be, and ultimately have to make sure that we're servicing the customer.
How insightful. If you haven't tuned into that episode yet, be sure to check it out because Scott tells us a very interesting story about butterflies. In this next episode, we learn about the importance of building and maintaining relationships with your customers, which is very, very prevalent and important in transportation and honestly in every other industry. Justin chats with Ryan Collins, who is the Chief Revenue Officer of TriMac, in this clip about how to sell to Fortune 500 companies and deliver value. You'll also learn how enterprise sales is related to pre-marriage counseling.
If I'm running and managing a sales team right now and I'm trying to sell into Fortune 500 companies, what advice are you giving me today to help me get those messages across, sell value into there? I'm probably answering the question in some ways, but what advice are you going to give me if I'm coming to you and asking for said advice as maybe a smaller company looking for some support on how to handle Fortune 500 organizations?
Yeah, my perspective on that is provide as much certainty as you can in an uncertain environment. So you can do that by providing data. The reality is that we all have short-term memories. There's a human element to what we're operating in today, which is people are feeling a lot of pressure. Loads aren't moving as fast as they want. Their customers are frustrated. They're threatening to leave them for other suppliers, etc. So it's a really heightened environment. You've got to sort of be able to digest that, calm it down, and then bring the value that you can bring to the table with clear backing data. And if you can do that, I'm not saying that we can guarantee 100% on-time service across North America. That's not something that I think anybody can offer today. But we can with data say, hey, in this market specifically with this driver set, we can provide X and Y services. And you can start to get a feel for what that actually means tangibly with an underlying data set. And so that's my recommendation to anybody that's willing to listen is show up and try and provide some certainty, back it with data, build that business case. And we said this earlier, that can be handed off 2 or 3 steps down. That's a one-pager that somebody can read it and go, okay, this makes sense. I get what they're trying to accomplish.
So yeah, I guess really what that is to say, like it's really, it does come down to really just find the value, right? What can you offer? Where do you fit in there? And be really sort of specific with that offering and be clear with that offering, I think. And that's, sort of to add to that, I do find that there is it's an overzealousness, I think, especially among sort of small to mid-sized businesses about trying to do it all. And I think that's very, very risky. Obviously, you're going to dilute your core value prop and also dilute your services too. And I think that's even so. To your point, as a large organization that in many ways probably can do it all in some cases, or at least give the impression that you can do it all. It sounds like it's really about honing in on the thing that you can do and using data and facts to support it, which really is, again, just I think ultimately brings down to those who offer the most value will win.
We're working with a customer right now. It has a fairly large scale to it, and we decided to do some premarital counseling, is what we called it. Literally blocked in my calendar as such. And the idea is you have to address the insecurities that come with that. What's your mortgage look like? How many kids are you going to have? If you got a dog, are you going to fence the yard? You have to work through some of those things to be able to go, okay, is this in scope or out of scope? Is this the right scale? Is it the wrong scale? Should this market be part of it? Should it not be part of it? You have to be able to acknowledge that you can't solve everything, because the industry in general is so fragmented that I think anybody's naive to think that they can solve it all for a single customer. And you can practice it in scale, and my experience has been is that when you can go deliver in a market, that then becomes replicable and it becomes iterative. So you can't solve it at once, but you might be able to solve it over sort of 5 sprints, let's say, in a solution that you're learning and constantly evolving and tweaking and getting better at it. And before you know it, you've got the market that you would hopefully set out for. But I don't think the big chunk bites exist as much with the amount of friction that's in the industry now.
Our next guest is one of the early customers of RoseRocket and has a lot of experience implementing software in his business. Michael Melwicks is the co-founder and CEO of Moto Transportation Services, and he talks with Justin about implementing a new software, the change management needed, and how to manage employees who are not enthusiastic about adopting a new software. Mike sets super realistic expectations, and we can all use to negate change management.
So going back to Rob's visit out there for what that was about, and we've put a lot of energy in our business around getting customers live. And obviously from that point to this point, our business has changed immensely, and we have a lot more people, a lot more processes, and we actually have metrics on these types of things. And back then it was a lot more hand-to-hand combat, a bit more brute force in terms of how we did it. But I have to think from your side and a lot of the the customers that we work with, especially for how many staff members were you converting at that time? Just remind me, what was the how many people did you have to get over from one software to the next?
We were 30 at that time.
Yeah, so it's not an insignificant sort of change management exercise.
Yeah.
Giving advice to people who are looking at an organization of similar sizes. We have a lot of companies in and around that size, and a lot of people on the sidelines maybe looking to start working with Rose Rocket that are sort of in and around that size. What kind of advice can you give those companies who are about to or are currently going through a change management with like that, specifically in trucking? Because as you alluded to, these aren't millennial marketers, right? This is a different user base and a different sort of demographic. So any insights there?
How much time do we have? No, I'm just joking. But really, if I were just to cherry pick the main points is, when doing that, we need to have someone in the organization that knows the organization top to bottom and pull them aside from implementation. And I'm sure you see it all the time. We were guilty of it in the past, is we implement this thing while working in the business. This is a complete separate project that needs to have attention by one person to basically facilitate each of the departments and make sure they're operating correctly. And I would go as far as saying, looking back, I would be running the system in parallel prior to doing any type of switchover, and just to make sure that not every system's the same, and you've got to work through these things and find different avenues. But a lot of people talk to me about software, and they're just implementing, when they have time. It just doesn't work. You have to pull someone off and put them on this project that knows the business top to bottom. That's the number one thing you have to remember.
It's interesting you say that in parallel, because the only comment I'd have to that is, I feel like, is there not risk that parallel is a bit of a chicken exit, in that you can say it's not perfect over here in the new environment, which it never is going to be, right? But does parallel not offer the opportunity to offboard very quickly back to the way things were, kind of that safety net?
Oh, that's the biggest challenge you're going to have to, go. People want to go back. It's, who moved my cheese thing.
Yeah.
You're constantly fighting your legacy staff, if you will, on doing things differently and for the greater good of the future. That is the number one challenge. I should have said that earlier. Number one challenge you have to deal with. But running in legacy is what I didn't really mean running two systems in with the same data. I mean running through the motions in parallel, making sure that it's running properly, so that when you go to the Who Moved My Cheese staff members, you can show them, well, we've thought of this. This is how it's going to work in the future, and we're going live Monday.
Yeah, right. And so there is that there's no fail-safe at that point. It's going to work. There's going to be problems, and you're just going to endeavor to work through those for when you come out on the other side.
Yeah, and of course, just one sec. I should say that this one person is going to bring in, other members of the team and departments and things that make sure it's operating. And you should never have to go down that route. But there's definitely, in every company, you're going to have to prove yourself.
A bit of a loaded question here. How long does it take for the Who Moved My Cheese folks, as you call them, to be non-vocal about going back or being okay with the way things are? What is that sort of period of disruption? How long would you think that to be, or what's normal?
What's normal is definitely you're going to in for a month of hell.
Yeah.
With these people, and then it'll wane over time. I say that probably there is still people today that are like, I wish it would do this or wish it would do that, but that's with anything, and that's probably in their nature. So I would go back to it. This 30 days of transition. You have to work really hard in the first 30 days to win them over and show them the value of the software or whatever you're implementing.
Thanks for that snippet, Mike, and also thank you for being our customer and soundboard. So, some concepts I love is learning lessons from one industry to another. And in this clip, we get just that. Justin talks with Mark Gooderham, who founded Gooderham Sales Talent, about hiring salespeople through the lens of technology sales hiring. Mark shares what a company needs to think about when hiring a salesperson, and most importantly, around the timing of hiring a salesperson.
I think that's one of the things when I want to speak about our trucking cohorts. They're often, and when you're a smaller trucking company, you're largely relying on potentially a couple or a few large accounts that you're working for. And you may be working very, very heavily, if not exclusively, for the brokerage community, because again, they're doing the work of securing a lot of the freight. You as a trucking company want to just simply, you want to move freight from A to B and make as much money as you possibly and reasonably can and do it safely and effectively. As the companies start to grow, they want to start thinking about selling. How would you, so working in tech companies, which are generally very well funded, can spend money on all sorts of not just the people themselves, but you can have 5 people in a sales process. And I can think of Rose Rocket. I don't want to say it's that many, but it actually might be. And so when you think about a company that's maybe smaller, that's thinking about hiring some of its first salespeople, how do you kind of coach them or talk to them about how can they approach it in a way that at least somewhat sets them up for success, or how to think about it in a way that will set them up for success?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think first I'd ask them why. Like, why do you need a salesperson now? Why not 2 months ago? And why not 6 months from now? What I mean is that I've worked with a lot of companies, especially like a lot of tech startups, where they've just gotten some funding and they see a great vision, and now we're ready. Let's go. We need some account executives. We need 6 of them. We're going to hire right away and fast and furiously. And the problem with that is sometimes these companies don't have the proper pieces in place to build a sales team yet. Like, they don't have customer success. Like, how are these, and I'm speaking more in the tech space, but this can really translate to anything. But okay, so we're going to hire all these great salespeople because we always think sales equals revenue. So they call me, Mark, we need some great salespeople, and I deliver, and they've got these awesome overperforming salespeople that go out and close all this business, but they don't really have the product to implement yet. They don't have maybe, how are we going to onboard this customer? How are we going to train them? How are we going to do all that stuff? So you want to make sure you have all those key pieces in place, the back end people, whether it's solution consultants, engineers, and everything like that. It's almost like the salespeople need to be hired last. So I've had this conversation with companies before where, I kind of see the writing on the wall, and it's like, are you sure you want to hire salespeople now? Like, what's the process? What happens if someone closes a $400,000 deal? Are you ready for that? And sometimes the answer is no. And what ends up happening, you put a candidate in place and they end up leaving in 6 months because they're like, this company doesn't have it together. So you really want to be ready and have all your ducks in a row to hire those salespeople. That'll be my main thing.
And how can a small business separate themselves from an opportunity? What can they do? So if you've got again, we're talking about tech companies, but going back into transportation, how can a small company with no brand stand out to a candidate or be an attractive place to go, and not having a Salesforce or a JB Hunt tagged to their business?
Good one. Could be culture. I mean, some people, young salespeople want to make sure that there's a culture that is going to offer training. They're going to offer some, career progressions. And sometimes these young, smaller companies, that's a nice key advantage that they have over the large engines, right? Where, yeah, if you come in here, we're going to train you. You're going to get, sort of an MBA on working together with me, who's the CEO and president. We're going to go together on calls. We're going to close business. And as we grow, your sales hire number 1 or 2, there's an opportunity in, 12, 15 months, if things go well, and now we need 3 more salespeople, guess who's going to be the first person to be shoulder tapped, to be a bit of a team lead or a management role. So, we talk about a sales pitch, but it's a value prop you can really give a candidate on, the benefits of joining a small company and a real fast growing company. Also, you got to know your unique competitive advantages in the market, and we all like to think we have one. So if you really believe in it and you've got conviction and you're speaking to these potential candidates to join your company, then you want to talk about that. Sometimes if it's a large 10,000 employee company that you're going up against, customers can get lost in the mix and in the shuffle, where there's a little bit more of that hands-on approach from a customer service standpoint too.
The next clip is a topic that some of you may have heard for decades: driver hiring. Justin hosted Jeremy Raymer, founder and CEO of Driver Reach, and in this episode he shares some tips on how to attract drivers to your trucking company, and most importantly, what it takes to retain them.
Going back to the driver themselves. So if I'm a small to mid-size trucking company, and let's pretend I don't have driver reach and I'm not going to buy it this year, but maybe you can catch me at the end of the year. What can I do to? I want to talk about attraction and I want to spend some time on retention as well. Mm-hmm. So what can I do now to attract new drivers? What are some of the better practices that you can do when you don't have a Knight Swift logo to wave, or what are some of the things that I can do today, at least to make it, because to me this feels like it's not one 50% gain, it's a 2% here, it's a 1% here type thing. And so what are some of those maybe little jabs that I can take at bettering my likelihood of attracting drivers?
Well, table stakes, be a good employer.
What does that mean?
Let's just be good. Treat people with respect and dignity and honesty and transparency, all the things that you would expect in a workplace. Not that you might experience regularly in a workplace, unfortunately, but that that it's really not complicated. If you treat people well, you're probably not going to lose. You'll easier to attract people, especially because the employees that you have will tell everyone they know, hey, you'll like it here. They're good here. They'll treat you really well. You'll feel like you're really part of something special. That stuff really matters. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is when you have employees that recognize that and you provide them an easy way to become ambassadors of your company brand to other trucking companies out there or to other drivers out there, now it's not about who can spend the most from an advertising marketing standpoint. You'll find that you will be way more successful if you can empower and referrals from your existing. Again, the table stakes is you have to be a good company that people enjoy working for and feel like they're part of something important. That's not that complicated, but it is intentional. It has to be intentional, top down. It's not a department, that's top down. But that being said, they're going to be far more successful at recruiting or helping to recruit drivers that will not only get hired, but will become loyal and remain loyal and stick around for a much longer time. I mean, statistically, it's not even close. And from a cost per hire standpoint, especially if you have a referral bonus type of program, not even close. That will always trump your ad spend, cost per hire, retention, cycle that's just never ending. But it takes work. And it's just easy to just throw budget at ads and let's just get a machine where we just try to bring people through and we know that we're going to lose 80 to 100% of them every year and we just keep this thing going. But that's a problem. You got to empower your employees, your drivers, create, an ambassadorship type of program where they're out there communicating with others and helping you attract people. And it's not just word of mouth. Same thing with when you do marketing, do stuff like, Facebook, Instagram, things like that, where drivers are the ones that are the voice, not the company, or at least not only the company. Because if I'm a driver and I'm interested in maybe working for you at ABC Trucking, and I see you saying what a great company you are to work for, well, yeah, of course you'd say that. But if I see one of your drivers on video saying, here's what I like here's why I came here and here's why I'm still here, that's way more compelling to me. That's believable. And I trust it more. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage those ambassadors.
As a marketer, we all know that reputation is everything, and PR is something that I think about often. For those not in marketing, PR can feel a little bit like an unknown beast that needs to be conquered. How does it even work? Do I need to do PR? It's beneficial for all companies to think about, no matter the industry. In this next clip, Justin talks with Susan Fall, founder of Launch It PR, about how to start thinking about PR as a trucking company and how the trucking industry can improve its reputation outside the industry.
What are some tips, that you can give to some companies that might be needed to do what can they do to get themselves started in the absence of working with Susan? What are maybe some quick little bullets for people to start thinking about, just so they can, I like to say, you can start thinking about PR. So what are some of those maybe first tips and first steps they can take?
That's a good question, and it really depends upon, is it a product? Is it a service?
Let's be a trucking company.
Yeah.
So let's do that actually.
Trucking company.
Yeah, let's be a trucking company, or let's be a transportation provider. So let's be a trucking company or a broker. We'll stay kind of away from the vendor side, right, for this topic.
So, a lot of times obviously first step, all right, budget. Where in, because somewhere in your budget, you obviously have your biz dev and that end, but okay, do you have your sales and marketing? Like that's kind of a first step of, okay, let's figure that out. But then from a basic PR, especially an external, again, what things are you doing within your company that need to be shared or is happening with your company? And that can be like I was saying earlier, I keep saying this million accident-free mile thing. That's easy. That's an easy basic. You find your local newspapers. This is really, you're not going to get national news coverage. Don't think you're going to get Wall Street Journal, but your local paper, absolutely. Highway Angel is one of my favorite programs, and we have so many rescues and good deeds that our drivers are doing every day. We probably get 10 applications a month, easy, for Highway Angels at TCA. Your organization, you can share those stories. So really, I guess that would be my first, is looking within what your company is doing, and share that and get it out of your bubble. We have this tendency we're going to share it on our company Facebook page. No, get your employees to share it on their personal Facebook pages. That's how it gets out of our bubble. It's a constant. I am big on LinkedIn, and all these kudos that we do to each other. But we all know that trucking is great. We all know we're essential. We all know the ins and outs of trucking. It's everyone else that doesn't. So that really is my constant push that I try to instill within our clients.
I really like the outside of the bubble. I really like the idea that, and I think that's a really important call out, and I want to just double down on that in here, because it's a great point. Because when you think about how this stuff is usually done, it is in a bit of an echo chamber in a sense. And so when you can go outside and have people talking about it in outside networks and create, it's a mild network effect, but it really is just advocacy and coming from believable sources, which are the people who are actually experiencing and doing the work. So it becomes credible, if nothing else. And I think that's a really nice thought exercise, and any business can do that. It doesn't require a budget. It just requires thought, and the pursuit of brand, the pursuit of your reputation. It's just being thoughtful of doing that. And this stuff doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a crazy undertaking. It doesn't have to be crazy expensive. It just has to be thought of and organized.
It comes down to pride. Again, back to that reputation. If you are proud of the company you're working for, and whatever it is that the company is doing, or what a driver did, whatever it may do, you as an employee, you as an individual, should proudly put that out there on your Facebook, Instagram, whatever, or talk about it at a dinner party. I don't care, however you want to. That is, and I think that is something that companies need to instill and just reiterate. I think a lot of times people don't think about it.
People have heard of venture capital, but what is it and how does it work in logistics? Justin talks with Justin Young, an investment manager from Prologis Ventures, about what venture capital is and how it works in the supply chain.
Let's do a thing that I think a lot of podcasts aren't doing. Let's explain what venture capital actually is. And so can you just, it's not an obvious thing. And so can we just get it out once and for all and have a really plain conversation about what venture capital is and how it might be different than other types of financing?
Yeah, for sure. So great comments. So what venture capital is, historically venture capital was a way for founders to, get alternative financing for an idea, right? And so what's still true today, and I'll talk about the difference between institutional venture capital and corporate venture capital, which is who I represent. But venture capitalists, they kind of live by this motto where they're not just looking for a return, but they're looking for venture returns. And venture returns is typically a 10x return on initial investment. And there's a few attributes within an idea and a founder and a team that sort of de-risks that idea of getting a 10x return, right? And what many people say in the industry is you're not looking for the number of hits at bat, but the number of home runs at bat, right? So you might have 10 investments and one of them might return the portfolio. That's all that matters, right, to a lot of institutional investors. And that's kind of what you could hope for. But, I think for many good sort of venture capitalists, there's a lot of pattern recognition on what makes a good company, So I'll that is institutional, and you can read all about on Medium, all these venture capitalists and their funds and partners are talking about how good they are at venture investing. I think what's inherently challenging about the sectors that we operate in, which is the industrial sector, there's a lot of technical debt. I think we operate at a very different. We're playing a little bit of a different game. And what I mean by that is long are the days where you can get some Silicon Valley founder that worked at, a FAANG company, and they're really brilliant technologists. But they can't, they have trouble starting a business in the industrial transportation sector. It's not as simple as let's write code to solve a problem, right? As there's business relationships. There's an inherent understanding of the business rules and dynamics of the industry. And you don't have to over-engineer something, right? If you look out into the market, everyone talks about this in supply chain. Like the whole supply chain is running on spreadsheets and email. That's true, right? That's 100% true. You're having an engineer write and build a product that's over-engineered where the end user just doesn't understand. It creates more barriers to entry. It creates harder change management, and you're speaking a different language from the end user, right? And so we look at this as, what is phase one of a company? How do you break into a customer and uniquely solve a pain point today? Once you solve that pain point, how do you build product over time that makes your solution sticky and continues to add value, right? And in supply chain world, that's kind of how we see opportunities. And it's not about, are you a brilliant technical founder? It's not about, did you come from, Stanford or Ivy League school? It's about, are you actually solving real pain points? And do you have a business plan that makes sense for the end user on day one? And if those two things don't check out, it's probably not going to work.
Thank you, Justin and Justin. Everyone wants to get paid quickly. In this clip, guest Bharath Krishnamurthy, CEO and co-founder of Denim, which is formerly Axle Payments, chats with Justin about cash flow and how carriers want to get paid today.
I think about from my own experience in this, and I think there's a ton of value here. And I know when I had a brokerage now, 10 years ago, maybe more even at this point, there wasn't a product like this. Like I remember actually thinking about this from just what we were sort of spending on cash flow management, quite frankly, was, a product like this made sense. So I remember going out to market looking for something, and it was just a difficult product to find. And so I'm going to use some sort of layman terms here because I'm not super familiar with how all this works. But at the time it was, you could do it, but you could only get margin back. And I'm assuming that's how you guys do it too, right? That's how you sort of mitigate the risk here. It's the margin you make on the load is what we advance you, and then you keep the rest, and then you pay the carrier directly?
Yeah, we'll pay the carrier directly.
Right. And does that, from a broker that's starting out, how do they reconcile that in their business? And I know you're not... So there's what you're supposed to do and what you do. And so there's this idea that as much as you're going to pay that carrier in 30, 35 days, 40 days even realistically, you're hoping to kind of create a bit of a spread between the cash flows. You're hoping some of that, that you can get paid quicker, you can hold on to some of that money, and possibly even put it to work in a really short sort of turnaround time, and then pay the carrier. You do use a lot of the money that isn't yours because the margins are such in brokers, they're not gigantic, that you're using some of that money potentially as cash flow. Now, that can get super dangerous downstream. But how does a new business get started doing that? I guess it's just simply there is enough money in there to make that business work when you're small enough that you make $400 on a load, that's okay to kind of get advanced that, and that's enough for the day, and that keeps it going. Like, I just feel like there must be conversations you're having with people who have some concern around even the optics of just having a bank account that's got, 900 grand sitting in it, even though 800 of it's not yours. There's just, how do you guys think about that, or how do your customers think about that?
Yeah, I think what's changed a lot from when you were running that brokerage to today is this dynamic around how the carrier wants to get paid. So, 4 or 5 years ago, that strategy worked, where you could take, as a brokerage, you could take that money in from the shipper, maybe spend some of it, use some of that working capital, and then pay the carrier in 30 days. But today, many carriers are expecting quick pay, right? And especially when they're working with these smaller brokerage, the long tail, that's one of the things they're expecting in order to choose them over someone like Uber Freight or whoever else, right? Which means that from the broker's perspective, they have to get that cash out the door immediately, right? So now it's actually like they need to pay the carrier before the shipper pays them. And when we come in now and can make that advance, it's kind of like a win-win-win, right? For us, we're able to make that payment to the carrier, so it eliminates that risk. For the brokerage, they no longer need to worry about handling that like payments processing, like collecting the check, mailing it out. We'll handle all of that for them. And then for the carrier, they can get paid immediately, right? Which is ultimately what they want. And they can get it whatever's easiest for them, right? Whether it's a check or electronic payment. And that dynamic is what keeps everyone really happy and makes it easy for those brokers to continue to attract and retain the best carriers.
So when we're thinking about today's market, I'm going to just kind of pivot off of that a little bit. But I think that was a really actually good way to think about that, and that's really interesting. And I for sure, the sort of competitive advantage of money now. You see it permeating across all business sectors. Every business of technology, fintech, basically, right? How do we move money instantly? How do you get paid instantly? It's sort of. It's not. I was going to say it's in vogue, but that would be unfair to suggest that it's going to go away. And it's just here. That's just what it is, because the apparatus and the technology is in place to facilitate these types of things. So cash flow it's not even like king anymore, because it's like there is no cash flow. It's just immediate pay.
Jeff Bezos had this thing that he would tell everyone at Amazon, which is like, one thing that we know is going to be true forever is that customers are going to want more selection. They're always going to want more selection. They're always going to want cheaper products, and they're always going to want those products faster.
Yeah.
And as long as we build a business that optimizes those three things forever, we're going to be able to take over the world. And I think, what I'm hearing from you is kind of a parallel in the world of money, which is that people always want cash faster, right? Yeah. And that's never not going to be true. It was true in the past. It's just easier to do it now because we can move these funds electronically. These systems now speak to each other in a way that they didn't before. And so that expectation about what is considered fast is continuing to, I guess, grow. We want things even faster than we did last year, and last year we wanted them even faster than we did 10 years ago.
The utilization of data is taking logistics by storm. I've been hearing tons of executives that want to leverage data for better decision making while enabling themselves for the utilization of AI and machine learning in the future. In this next clip, Justin chatted with Don Salvucci-Favier, CEO and Chief Product Officer of Green Screens AI, about the amount of data it takes for AI to learn from and the impact of all of that data. She also shares the importance of data cleansing and working with clean data.
I've got questions around the AI component. We do have a bit of experience. I do personally have some experience with that. I'm curious, and maybe now, like, the one thing I know about AI, and especially like a learning algorithm like this, is you need copious amounts of data to get that thing trained, like tons, like more than I think most people can actually appreciate. And even then, it's like you still kind of need more. So these would have to be. So you mentioned that you're working with companies, even a year's worth of data. Even if you're like a mid-sized company, from my knowledge, I don't know that that's enough. But you say you're using, this is an aggregate across all customers that allows you then each one that adds to this is an attribute to all of the data. So I think that actually becomes pretty powerful because you actually end up with a critical mass of data amongst all of the customers, because there's really very few companies in this industry that have clean enough data, first of all, for you to actually work with, which is very, very difficult. And most people's data is a hot mess, to be polite. Even when they think it's good, it's not necessarily serviceable in this type of environment. And then the amount of the sheer just data inputs have to be just gigantic. So maybe like a little bit about that, I guess.
Yeah, I've got stories to tell
Sure,
there.
sure.
I will say generally when we're onboarding a customer, on average, when we're onboarding data, you're right, the cleanliness is incredibly important. And we therefore have a set of probably 36 data filters that we always apply that is intended to identify outliers and dirty data and really protect the algorithm from that type of information. Generally, when we onboard a new customer, 35 to 40% of the data they send us is flagged as dirty or outlier. And an outlier is unusually high or unusually low rates. So when we bring on a customer, we plot out, and then most of this is automated, and then we have analysts that will review the output, but plots out kind of on a standard deviation, right? All of their loads in distance bands, and it's looking for what is the standard deviation, and anything that falls above or below that would be flagged as an outlier. And each customer has their own dynamic formula, right? That determines for that customer what is an outlier. Things like a load that's less than 5,000 pounds. Now, by default, we would flag that because maybe it's a partial, maybe it's an LTL that was miscoded as a truckload, right? Because we're only looking at truckload today. But the cool thing is we have the ability to then adjust the parameters based on that customer's business, right? Because if you're shipping popcorn or empty water bottles or bubble wrap, or we have one customer that is shipping a lot of components for SpaceX, which are huge, but they're very lightweight, right? So a 3,000-pound shipment is a full dedicated truckload. So we can adjust those parameters by customer, by shipper, in order to say, okay, this should not be filtered. This is actually a valid truckload rate and things like that. So the data cleansing is really step number one in our process, is looking at those filters. And those are continuously, and I neglected to mention in my previous talk, we don't just take the historical data, we take a live feed of data thereafter. So at least daily, the customer is then updating their booked loads, and we're constantly retraining the model based on that. But the data cleansing is step one. From a amount of data perspective, it's been an interesting evolution for us. Our very first beta customer, we were fortunate enough to work with a good size company. They're a $3 billion asset-based carrier that has a $300 million brokerage business, right? So pretty sizable brokerage business. And what we actually found is that customer individually did have enough data to be statistically relevant and highly accurate. I mean, we're talking about a margin of error, certainly sub 10%, in many cases sub 5%, right? So that's great. But as we started bringing on smaller customers, and by the way, our smallest customer today, well, we do have a few startups that really don't have any data today, and we work with them a little differently. But a customer that has data, our smallest customer is 3 million today. But as we started bringing on some of those smaller customers, you're right on. I mean, they didn't have enough of their own data to be statistically relevant. We had to start looking at other ML models, machine learning models. So getting into more mixed models and leveraging the aggregated data more heavily and things like that. So it is additive. Every time we add a customer, our network grows. So today we have about $9 billion in revenue data. It's about $3.5 million transactions. There are 3.5 million transactions. We think by the end of the year we'll probably be over 20 billion in data dollars. And interestingly enough, although we kind of came to market saying we're going to target the small to medium business SMBs, we're now engaging with some very large billion-dollar plus brokers that may have already invested in this technology, but they've realized two things. Number one, it's expensive to build and maintain this. It's hard. It's not easy. And number two, they will always be limited to their own data. So even if because their competitors are not going to share their data with them, right? So even if they're a $3 billion company, that's fantastic, but they'll always be limited to that $3 billion plus whatever their natural growth is, right? Where we've already a year in business aggregated 9 billion. We think we'll be over 20 by the end of this year. That's just going to continue to grow. So, a lot of the conversations with those larger companies are going quite well because of that now, because they realize the value of the data.
Thank you, Don, and it was great meeting you at the FreightWaves conference. Starting a business is hard, and starting it without significant capital is even harder. Nicholas Reasoner, CEO and founder of Transloop, comes on the podcast to talk about bootstrapping a freight brokerage business. He shares some great tips throughout the episode on doing this, and in this clip, he shares the importance of visibility, working with tech partners, and how the Transloop team is set up for success.
So you don't get to that level of revenue, I don't believe, without obviously timing, luck, value prop that's interesting. But what did you do? Like, what was some of the secret weapons, or what was the moment in time when you figured something out that really took it from, where it was to where it was about to go? Like, what were some of those moments? And I probably know baked in here are some pretty significant size logos that allow for a number like this. I know how these businesses work, and so that's okay, because you actually have to do the right work to land an account or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 like that anyway. So what was maybe some of the breakthroughs, I guess, is what I'm asking, that you had along the way that really allowed you to unlock that type of velocity?
Yeah, I think our pitch was a lot different in the sense, one, we had experience. Our big pitch from day one was we want to be transparent, we want to be reliable, and we want to be collaborative. Those are our 3 pillars throughout still. And how do you do that? You have to have, and as I was at Forkites, I learned you have to have pure transparency. I mean, the Amazon effect is real. People want to know where their product's located. And when you're updating customers via email, as we were doing from the Excel type brokerage I was doing in the past, it's really hard to, have a shipper buy in that you're forward thinking or tech focused if you're not giving them a sexy UI to look at for where their shipment's located. And Forkites taught me that, in the sense that these shippers want to know where all their shipments are located. The trans manager, whoever it is, the customer service teams, the accounting teams want to have the paperwork flowing from them. So luckily, from day one, we knew we had to bring on a really strong technology partner. And the fact that we could preach that we're transparent, reliable, and collaborative, and then do a demo on our actual product, and how they're going to see their shipments in real time, was a big prop for us. And that allowed us to bring on some larger logos from the get-go. And then once you get that business, you have to know how to service it. It's not just booking the truck and creating margin. We do some things on the back end where we make them a little stickier than most, I would say. It's not just, hey, do you have any loads available? We really want them to be incorporated within our processes. So, there's a reason we have a good amount of operations people within our teams. We're not cradle to the grave as I was in my past. We have a 3-split model from operations, carrier sales, customer sales, so we can really get the customers to buy into our team and our processes. But I think that was a big part from the beginning to getting some of these customers from going from 5 shipments a week to 50 shipments a week, and going from 100 shipments a week in the company to 1,000 shipments plus a week. So that, I think that was a big part of how we scaled, was putting the right technology, but then actually backing it up once we got the opportunity. And I think our experience and where we came from in the past absolutely helped. We've still tried to somewhat instill that within our hiring processes. We really like that 2 to 10 year mark on hiring people that have some experience, so less things fall through the crack. So I would say that was a big buy-in that we got from our customers at the beginning.
On the topic of starting a business, getting your business to a steady state takes a lot of work. This next guest has been an entrepreneur in the trucking industry for many years and came onto the podcast to share how to get your freight business from 0 to 1, as well as other insights on being an entrepreneur in this space. Charlie Dahoney is currently the Vice President of ZBox America, and in this clip, he shares about how his natural curiosity has helped him and how he stayed focused and motivated about his goals over the years.
Challenging, do you ever find that to be counterproductive? You lack focus, or does it harm you in any way, do you find?
Well, I'd say earlier in my life, certainly,
when I started so I played college football through college. Like I had that framework and that just like consistent, be here at this time, get this done, do this thing, or lose your scholarship. So like very, very high cost of failure there. So that got me through school. When I got out of school, I think Worldwide Express is the perfect company for me to go to work for because they gamified the shit out of the way we did our jobs. Yeah. Like they went on the very first interview and they showed you, after walking you around for a full day in a business park, wearing a suit, sweating, everything off, they would show you, hey, if you just do that 50 times a day, you should get 5 leads. You should set 2 appointments. You should close 1 deal. And if you do that for 1 year, you'll be making $100,000. Yeah. So mathematically, they gave this logic that was so sound. And then when you join, every week the ranking numbers are out. So it was just like playing sports. How did I do? What are my metrics? What's my average? All these things, right? So I think like when I was young, Worldwide Express kept me so focused on Worldwide Express, there was no time for anything else. When I became an entrepreneur and then all of a sudden I had nothing but time, there was moments where my wife would leave to go do her sales job so that she could actually pay the bills and keep a roof over our head. And I'm sitting there with my laptop on my lap going like, man, like I can't go down the Facebook rabbit hole. This is like 2008, 9. So should I look for a job today or should I go find a new customer, Yeah. And then once I get that first bit of momentum, you get that first customer. Well, now it's like you got a boss again. And then that just kind of fuels the flywheel. So I do see people's natural curiosity throw them off course. For me, as a father of 3 boys now and a husband to this woman who has like mortgaged everything in her life and her entire identity to raise our children and support me through these endeavors, that inherently like keeps me focused every single day on what's important right now. What's the next most important step in the mission? And a lot of times, when you start to get overwhelmed, you start to think about like, man, I want to be all the way up there, but right now I'm down here. I had this great mentor at Worldwide Express, this guy named Joe Judson, who was just like such a dynamo of helping grow that company and just somebody who like really made a meaningful difference in my life. And I remember one night, like a late night conversation when he said, Charlie, you know what makes me better than most guys? I'm like, what? He's like, because when most guys see all the way up there and they know that's where they want to be, they get stressed out and worried and they stop trying. But I think like, if I want to be up there, then today I need to get there. The next day I need to get there. And it's that step by step, chunk by chunk, that framework that I learned at a young age that keeps me going, because like, just like you, to get from 0 to 1, you have to like deal with failure like nobody's business. But then you have to like, you might not have like champagne and a steak dinner on those little wins, but you certainly find that time in the car where you're like, oh shit, man, we got our first response to an email today. Yeah. Or, oh yeah, that guy agreed to meet with us. Like he sounds interested. And like, I get goosebumps thinking about these little tiny things. And so it's what I find inspirational now about coaching startups. It's the same reason why I love coaching kids in sports. Is like, nobody gets where they want to be in one fell swoop. Anything worth trying takes time, or worth achieving takes time. And a lot of times what I find with founders is like, do they need some help kind of on their deck composition? Do they kind of need some help thinking through their cap table? Could they use some introductions to VCs? Yes, all of these things. But most often, man, they just need hey, brother, you're doing a great job. Or, you know what? That is good shit right there. It doesn't feel like it right now, but you need to hold your head high. You need to rest well tonight. And if I'm around them, I'll give them a hug, or I'll give them a virtual high five. But most of the time, all of us just need somebody to say, dude, don't be so hard on yourself. Yeah. Love yourself, trust yourself. You're doing fine. And that's the joy that I find in life, is just sharing that with people and seeing the weight of the world lift off their shoulders and know that, hey, they're coming back to give it hell tomorrow because they didn't quit today. They didn't die.
The next clip I'm about to share is from a very special episode where I interviewed Freight Famous host Justin Bailey about the journey of building Rose Rocket. Justin, as some of you may know, is one of 3 co-founders, and in this episode, he shares a lot of insights about what it took to build Rose Rocket with his co-founders, Justin Sky and Alex Luxie-Dabby. We dive into work, life, and mental health. This is a very special episode, and I hope you enjoy the clip, but most of all, check out the full episode if you haven't. And Rose Rocket was born off of, it was born before you guys got into YC, but it was hugely accelerated by getting into YC, which for the audience, Y Combinator is an incubator program in Silicon Valley. Have you ever seen the show Silicon Valley? It feels like that, where it's a bunch of people in a house hacking away at a startup. So Tell us a little bit about what was like going to YC or even deciding to go and getting in, because I know that wasn't an easy choice to make.
No, so I mean, we were so that would have been 2015 at this point. So we were winding down FreightNext, which was the digital freight marketplace, and we were just starting to get Rose Rocket going. We had sold a customer on really some wireframes and an idea. So we had a quote unquote paying customer, really no product to speak of. And we applied for Y Combinator, quite frankly, because, well, it was very, I think still is to a degree today, but even more so back then, it was pretty illustrious. I mean, it was kind of like the Harvard of incubators. This is, if you were going to do something like this is what you wanted to do and where you wanted to be. So we applied for it really with no expectation that we would get in. The acceptance rate, I think at that point there were 6,000 applications, 600 interviews, and 60 companies selected, basically.
1%.
So less than, actually. Mm-hmm. So it was right, around 1%. And so we did a quick little video, talked about what we were doing, sent it down there. When they call you to say you've been accepted for an interview, so you're one of the 600 to come for an interview, they pay for you to go down there, they pay for you to fly down there, but they give you like 2 days notice. Like, so on Tuesday, they're saying Thursday, you have a 10-minute interview in Mountain View with 3 people you don't know, and that will decide if you're going to get in or not. But what that actually was deciding for us, this decides the fate of your company and your future, because we were completely out of money. We were, we were so unequivocally broke that in fact, when we went down to Y Combinator, we had to, because what you would pay for it and they would pay you back. Mm-hmm. We had to borrow money just to get there, just to go do the interview. We had to borrow money to put, when we eventually got accepted, to put a down payment on our house that we were renting from one of our partners at Y Combinator, because we didn't have the money to go down there. Mm. And so we didn't probably appreciate it at the time, because again, when you're in the moment, you're just sort of doing the thing. But we were, we were already dead at that point. We didn't know it before we went to Y Combinator. We just weren't ready to sort of accept that reality. But looking back, we'd already, FreightNext had already killed us. It had wiped us out financially. And so we were just running on fumes at that point. And so this was you want to talk about a Hail Mary. This was a Hail Mary. We went down to the interview, got in, obviously. And I think they gave us $150,000. That's part of like what you get when you went down. That's a lot more now. But that was huge for us. It was everything.
But like financially it was difficult, but also like emotionally it was difficult, because at that point, like you had a family. You know, most people that think about, 4 dudes in a basement building a company, like don't have families that they have to support. So like, what was that like, having to make the decision to go to Silicon Valley for a few months when?
Yeah, it was 8 months.
8 months.
When it was all said and done. And it was really difficult. I was freshly divorced at that point, relatively freshly divorced, and things hadn't settled super well. Anybody who's listening who's been through a divorce knows that there's sometimes infinitum period of unsettlement, if you will, but especially early days. It's pretty hard to find your footing from your own perspective within the relationship, how you're managing the kids, all the things that go through that. It's a pretty overwhelming and intense time. And my kids were young, and so there was a lot of guilt from my side. There was a ton of guilt around doing that. It felt very selfish, because it did still feel like such a 1 in a million shot. Mm-hmm. That it was like, okay, I'm going to go spend, at the time, whatever I thought it was going to be 6 months in Silicon Valley and get to live this, this fun entrepreneurial dream, and basically just like fuck off from all my responsibilities, more or less. I was able to send some money home for the first time in a long time. That's quite frankly how I was able to rationalize to go at that time, because my ex-wife was relying on me for money in a pretty meaningful way too. Again, we were fresh off, so she had to find her footing. She hadn't been working. The kids were young, and it was so we were scrambling. And so this was hey, I've got to do this. This is really our path right now to just actually paying rent. Right. But besides that, it was an incredible amount of guilt. I mean, I wasn't home for Father's Day. I wasn't. It just there was a lot that went into that. But saying all that, there was this just, again, when people feel this way and they fail, it's arrogance. And when people succeed, it's intelligence. So I don't want to be careful that I think it's conflating a little bit to say it was anything. But I did feel this drive of certainty around having to do this. It's just like there's something in me that says I just have to keep going, and we have to do this. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, not just from a personal perspective, but again, the likelihood that the doors are going to open for us to raise some continued financing post YC were very, very high. It's almost a right to raise money when you went to Y Combinator back then. So we knew we were going to walk into some money, even if we had a crappy experience there and put up a crappy product and did crappy results. So I think that we just knew that would allow us just to keep the lights on a little bit longer and keep going on this vision. And in so many ways, I don't think we knew even what we were building. We were so caught up on survival that it was, let's just do it. Let's just sell it. And so we did it. And, we went there and we raised some money. We were able to come back and hire a couple people and we just kind of kept, we just kept surviving.
Keep on surviving.
Yeah, it's really the name of the game in this space, I think. And it's the name of the game, I think, in startups. The ones who make it are the ones who last.
One of our favorite parts of building this podcast is coming across interesting guests in the industry that have things to say. While scrolling LinkedIn one day, Justin came across a thought-provoking post by Kyle Littner, an industry consultant. He invited Kyle on the podcast and kicked off the episode by reading that exact post. In this clip, Kyle shares what the potential impact of standardizing certain things in the industry could be.
All of these problems were there prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic had a way of bringing it to everyone's attention. And then you get your average citizen that says, for the first time in their life, why is the supply chain broken? Because their package didn't come for 6 months, let alone not even being 6 days. And then you get enough people that complain to their elected official, and the elected official doesn't know because nobody understands supply chain.
That's right.
And then even when they do speak to executives, there are plenty of them at companies that say, yeah, this is broken. This is what we do. And the irritating part for me is that the solutions already exist, and so much of what is wrong can be fixed almost immediately if we get some base level of cooperation. And I don't want to sound like an idealist, but some of these fixes are things that make businesses not only more profitable, but lower cost to the consumer and end up decreasing our footprint on the environment. So I hate the terms, but it's like the win-win-win, and everybody is in nirvana on this. Why are we not doing these things?
Let's talk about that a bit. And so this is, I like this thematically as, so this is fun. How do we commoditize our businesses for the better? And so how can companies, so when you say these things are easier, there's low hanging fruit, and you didn't say it's easy, I'm paraphrasing. What are some things that come to mind that in terms of organizations, what can they do to better, future-proof themselves, quite frankly?
I
know it's a pretty abstract question, but you can pick a few points if you'd like here.
No, I'll answer it like this. The fix for much of what's wrong in freight begins with true standardization. And what I mean by that is let's come up with some commonly accepted terms. Let's start calling things one thing, or at least for transactional business, one thing. We start with the actual load. If it is booked immediately or non-standard, that's spot, right? We're all going to call it spot. We're not going to call it ad hoc or any other name for it that every other company does. Let's come up with a term for anything that runs on a contractual way. Let's call it contract or RFP, whatever you want to call it. Let's start with that. Once the verbiage and the vernacular is in place for everybody, all that's needed is sharing of data. There needs to be one central clearinghouse of that data. And I'm not saying anything beyond an OD pair, the trailer type, and the price paid for it. Those and the date. Now, when you have those things, the ability to not only de-risk the financial portion of this, but the ability to start putting trucks in the right place at the right time for future demand happens instantaneous, because the same technology that can route those trucks to where they need to be already exists in other industries for different applications. and has been around for 10 plus years. So now we have a reduction in empty miles. We have a reduction in wait times and dwell times. We have reduced the amount of fuel that gets consumed, the hours that are wasted by drivers. We have optimization and proper allocation of assets for the asset providers. We're doing more with less, and we're accommodating the plumbing, so to speak, for anything that starts to come in to the North America, we'll call it. So if the trucking component's fixed, now we can plug that into rail, you can plug that into maritime, and you can start to have this stuff run seamlessly, because everybody thinks there's this notion out there that we just need to get to autonomous vehicles, right? And that's problem solved. Trucks can run 24/7. They won't need the drivers. It'll be like the Jetsons. It'll all be amazing. It's not going to work like that, because the truck still won't be in the right place at the right time, because load planning and the variability in volume prevent those trucks from being in the right place at that true right time. It will get better, and it will get hypothetically cheaper, but it's not like if that truck is in LA or needed in LA and it's not in LA, problem solved. If we had somewhere where all of these transactions were on that general ledger for all to interact with, the ability to move the needle in demand, which is price, to have that truck then allocated to it, is seamless. The algorithms are unfortunately much, much faster than humans and can solve for these multi-legged problems instantaneously and into the future. So now we're getting to that part where I don't have an issue sourcing capacity. I don't have an issue putting my truck where it needs to be. I don't have an issue waiting for things to get loaded or unloaded. We could actually move to everybody's ideal scenario of more drops, right? We have enough containers and trailers, but that's so hard to plan because of all the moving pieces. Human beings can't do it. The problem with some of these companies that are trying to digitally do it is anyone that's optimizing for their customers are only optimizing for their customers, right? That is siloed to whichever company you are at. If you were at Stuber Freight, your Stuber Freight companies are doing great. But if you're not part of that network, it doesn't help anybody. And the fact that not one provider is more than 2% of the marketplace means that we are extremely inefficient. Even if your company is efficient, how much are you really helping the overall network? This is why we have 20+% empty miles. Everything's planned, ad hoc, off the cuff, let me get it where it needs to be routine. That's just not the way it works. That's not the way it should be. And it's not the way that it has to be. It just requires people doing a little bit of cooperation.
This one is exciting. Our next guest founded and runs one of the largest media companies in transportation, FreightWaves. In this next snippet, Justin asked Craig Fuller, CEO and founder of FreightWaves, about the future of transportation and why there's so much fragmentation in the industry. Craig has a wealth of experience, and this one is one for the books.
So I've got to ask about the future of transportation, and the reason I have to ask that is from an investor perspective, we have investors sort of asking us to lean into a thesis, if you will, or just I think in general it makes sense for us to have an opinion. But I think something that we really don't quite understand is why has there not been more mass consolidation in this space? And do you think that consolidation is the future, or does this industry maintain and stay very fragmented?
Yeah, we've lost video, so I don't know if that's important.
No, keep going. It's okay.
Okay. So I think, it's interesting because I had the same journey when FreightWaves started. Is I would go out and talk to investors, and the thing about venture capitalists is they're the smartest people in the room in their own mind. They will tell you everything that's wrong with your business plan. And oftentimes they know nothing about the industry. And it's interesting because in the early days, they didn't know me from anyone. Nowadays, it's sort of changed because oftentimes they're asking me the questions. And so I think there's this sort of the fragmentation of the industry exists because truck drivers are the reason there are so many trucking companies. So if you look at the fact that there have not, the assumption you would make in an industry as big as it is, an industry that's as commoditized as it is, that you would have someone with technology sort of advancing, someone would become the biggest trucking company. All of a sudden you would have this massive consolidation. And the question is, why hasn't that existed? It exists in every other market on the planet where all of a sudden there are scale advantages where one company has the benefit of easy access to capital and a superior technology platform, that it's able to basically consolidate and eat up the entire industry. And you see it in every other commoditized market on the planet. Oil and energy is a commodity, but it's largely controlled by major governments and major corporations. And so the reason trucking doesn't exist and that has never been consolidated is because of the truck driver. If you think about an industry where you add, for every asset you add, you also add human labor. So if I add a new truck, I also have to hire a driver. It is one of the most perverse industries where I have to scale not only in adding capital to add a piece of equipment, but I also have to add a human. And so the reason the industry hasn't consolidated is because there's no reason why a large trucking company should go buy another large trucking company, because when they do that, they risk losing truck drivers that work for the former company. And that's why you don't see large trucking companies all of a sudden have massive consolidation, because there are no economies to scale that are afforded in trucking. And it's because of the truck drivers. So once we see autonomous, which is inevitable, and it's probably at least 10 years out, but once it happens is when you'll see massive consolidation. But before then, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be an industry that's incredibly easy to get in and out of. It's an industry with no barriers to entry and no moat. And frankly, it's more attractive for someone who's driving a truck to be their own boss than it is to work for a large trucking company. So for all those reasons, the market's going to stay incredibly fragmented. But at some point, once we eliminate the truck driver as a human driver and they're required to be in the cab, you will see massive consolidation. And it will be a scary time for a lot of big companies and small ones alike, because we will now as an industry face big money and big marketing that will come from Wall Street and come from Silicon Valley. The industry really doesn't have to face today.
One of the coolest things is seeing how women are entering and thriving in logistics, an industry that has traditionally seen a very low percentage of female employment. Our next clip features Ellen Voya, founder, president, and CEO of the Women in Trucking Association. Ellen came on the show and shared many tips about supporting women in the industry. In this clip, she shares about how the transportation employers can attract more women into their talent pool.
So talk about and I think our listeners will be really interested in this. How does one attract women? And maybe let's do this in two ways. So I want to think about this from a driver point of view, and I'd like to just think about this like a general diversity, sort of more of a diversity inclusion kind of question. So if I'm thinking about drivers, is there something, and maybe it's just the antithesis of the things you had said ahead of time, but if I'm a company and I'm looking to attract more drivers, and I certainly am if I'm in the trucking industry, and there's a very large contingent of the population that is pretty underrepresented proportionally based on the numbers you just gave me, that seems like that's fertile ground for possible employment opportunities. So how do I do this? How do I put myself in a position where I will be a more attractive employer to women?
So first of all, ask your female drivers, if you have any, what you're doing right and what you could do differently. So some of the things are so subtle because the trucking industry has always been a very male-populated environment. So when you are always doing things the same way, you're not thinking. For example, uniforms. So many companies have uniforms that are men's uniforms, whether the shirts or the pants. And so if you ask your female drivers, women don't feel comfortable in men's clothing. So make sure that you have women's clothing. Also, trucks were always designed for men. They're changing that, and the companies are very much trying to make them more adaptable. Women have shorter arms and legs, and typically wider hips. And so you'll hear stories of especially shorter women from 20 years ago who had to sit on pillows to see over the dash, things like that. So this industry has to be more accommodating and more flexible to make women feel just as comfortable. But also, we have a recruiting guide. And in our recruiting guide, we talk about what graphics to use and what words to use. Women want words that like team-oriented, collaborative, things like that. They want a company that has their back. Also a company that cares about their safety. Men at a company are looking for pay equity from their company, but that's not what women are looking for. Women are looking for a company that cares about them. And so maybe use those kind of terms. And here's a little secret that we have in a recruiting guide. Very unscientific, but I started listening to female drivers talk about their motorcycles. So I went on our Facebook page, and we have about 11,000, mostly female drivers on there. And when I asked the question, over 80% of the female CDL holders had a motorcycle. So think about the kind of woman you're trying to attract, and then go to those places. Go to a charity run, a Harley ride, or something like that. Those are the kind of women who feel comfortable in the trucking industry.
I'm just sort of marinating on that one for a second and trying to. I think I'm trying to draw the straight line through that. Okay, that's a great tip actually, and that's actually really helpful. So I guess then the other side is we think about women in transportation sort of as a whole. So maybe outside of just driver, is it really the same application, maybe minus the motorcycle piece? Like, is it still the same? Does that apply? Does that blanket the both sort of sides of the? And if it does, then that means it kind of blankets all industries across the board anyway, I guess.
So you need to have an environment that is inclusive, and that means that you have to try, okay? So it means in your recruiting, where are you recruiting, what, again, terms and graphics, but also what is your culture like? So women are more risk averse in the boardroom and in the cab of the truck. So maybe a conversation involving maybe mergers and acquisitions, women are going to ask more questions and take longer to decide. Also, the decision-making process for men is to take, let's say, 5 options and narrow it down to 1 or 2 and make a quick decision, where women are going to look at those 5 options and then say, did I miss anything? Maybe call some friends and say, what are your thoughts on this? She's going to take longer to make a decision, may come to the same conclusion, but women do things differently. So if your culture values quick decision making in a hierarchical type environment, it's not as inclusive for women. So it really depends on what the company culture is like. And the more women you bring in leadership, the more you'll change the culture.
Thank you, Ellen. We had a lot of fun recording the next episode I'm about to share. For this episode, we invited some of the Rose Rocket community located around the Greater Toronto area into our office and recorded the show in front of a live audience. We were also so excited to partner with Samsara for this episode, and we have Aditi Veerasamy, the Group Product Manager for Connected Driver from Samsara, as a guest, as well as our very own Kyle Humphreys, who works as Rose Rocket's Solutions Manager. In this clip, Aditi shares the importance of data accuracy and how that can build trust between your drivers and your back office team.
From being in the field and working with the customers at that product level, and I think for those in the room who maybe aren't familiar with how product works, product is really I like to think of them as the interpreter between sort of the business and engineering. They will they understand contextually the business problems, but then can also and then will mold that to a developable, if that's a word, to the engineering team to build the thing. And you really will understand the value of a product manager if you ever start a startup and don't have one. And so if you start to do, you'll see this in sort of small tech companies where you'll have a sales-led founder and an engineer-led founder, and they're going to build a product that generally looks like shit because and acts a certain way because the engineer will not understand. They're the interpreters of the business. They're incredibly important in technology. And so they really sit at kind of a crossroads of a lot of areas in the business. So they ultimately have, they kind of have most of the parts of the business that go across their desk. So I'm kind of from that lens. What are you seeing in terms of what are the biggest maybe pains that people are looking to solve? So if you can look at this from a kind of a sales lens, everyone's coming in saying, I need to solve this thing, or you can look at it from a product lens, but what would you say from the driver perspective or the fleet operations perspective? What are those problems that are most occurring that you guys are kind of working on solving or are solving?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's probably 3 that come to mind here. I think the first one is data, and having all of that data in one place. And so a lot of people today are really struggling with using 5 different systems, because before there was all these disparate systems where data about hours of service or payroll or anything else across your operations was really split across a bunch of different systems. And from an efficiency perspective, but also just from a data accuracy perspective, it really helps create this the sense of trust between administrators and drivers in managing things like payroll. If you have, an integration where a driver is paid hourly and that hours of service data is just coming directly into the platform, there's no real argument about, I drove actually this many hours, or payroll thinks I drove this many hours. Everybody's looking at that same source of data, and it's all in one system. And so you're really able to kind of get that more holistic picture and also help people feel that sense of trust between kind of administrators and drivers, maybe where it wasn't there before.
That's a key, actually. If anybody's kind of worked in, and the group here has, many people here have, sort of in the dispatch office, the erosion of trust, that's a really nice way to put it, between operations of dispatchers and drivers is pretty tangible. And so I think a lot of this is around, there's sort of like driver attraction, driver retention. So how do we attract drivers? I feel like there is, Google it. There's a million different ways to kind of think about it. There's companies you can hire, there's software, but retention is really, the cost of losing a driver is so far superior to the cost of acquiring one in a way. So can you, to your end, can you get a driver that will stay with you for 20 years? The value to that, and that's excelling over 20 years, not just like, I have a body who's doing the work and they show up every day, so that's good enough. But someone who's enthusiastic, to a point anyway at least, to do that work, I think is so critical and so valuable to the organization, even from an ROI perspective. So I think that's a great point, because you talk about just building that trust. And I think that's not actually an area we talk about enough. We talk about the independent driver as a self-operating entity. There's so much autonomy. When you think of a driver, they're alone, they're in a truck, they're driving dark nights, and they're staying at rest stops, and they're always alone. But the truth is they're not. There's a support system behind them, and building trust and guardrails where there's safety around that. I mean, it's a great point to even think of it. It goes beyond just the driver, but it's building that trust between that very sometimes difficult relationship between payroll, dispatch, drivers.
The next guest we had on the show was Michael Caney, the founder of Growth Nexus. Michael chatted with Justin about what a 3PL should think about when scaling, and in this clip shares a 3-part framework that he uses in his business to succeed.
And I remember Scott just set me down one day and he's like, dude, you're all over the place. Nobody knows what the hell to do. Like, these people will follow you anyway, but nobody knows what the fuck you're doing. I was like, what do you mean? And he just gave me this very simple codified framework. You do these 3 things every day and don't do anything else. And I was like, well, that sounds really boring. I still use it today.
What are those 3 things?
So if you call me and I show up, I've just stolen Scott Pernod's stuff. So I probably owe Scott some money for that. So.
You should, yeah, Scott, if you're listening, there's a check. If it's not coming, it's due.
I sent him a sleeve of golf balls.
So what are these 3 things?
Yeah, so paint the picture, right? Did we win or lose? Do you know at a financial, so you go and you do right now people are doing quarterly planning, okay? And people will do EOS, or they'll do scaling up, or they'll call Vistage or some asshat to come in and tell them how to set a goal. Fine. But every single day, does the logistics coordinator have any idea how the 40 loads that they're supposed to track tie to that quarterly, right? Did we win or lose, right? Every single day, what do we have to do to win or lose?
So do you mean from an individual stakeholder's perspective? So not just a stakeholder, but an individual contributor's perspective. So every person in the business understands a metric, a KPI, an OKR, whatever we call it in the business, that they can tie back to sort of the core KPI or the core. This is we're all rowing in the same direction thematically.
Yeah.
Is that what
and even if they don't know how to tie it back, does the group leader, does the team leader know how to tie it back, right? So in sales, right, you have to do so many outreach, you have to do so many touches, right? Like, one of the things that I say that I stole from someone else, that's what I do. I steal things. And
so that's what everybody does. Yeah. We don't have to, let's not make apologies for that.
Yeah. More is not a goal.
Yeah.
Right, what do you want to do? More. Well, more is not a goal. West is not a destination. We head west, we could end up in Lubbock, we could end up in Albuquerque, we could end up all kinds of damn places. Specifically, where do you want to go? How do you want to get there? Right. So for a carrier rep, like, cover freight. Well, how do you want them to cover freight? Do you want them to have a specific load to carrier ratio? Do you want them reaching out to, all the new carriers in my carrier packets are RMIS and adding capacity? Like, what else do you want them to do? What are the leading indicators that lead to success, right? So revenue just tells you what happened in the past.
Yeah, it's a trailing indicator.
It's trailing, right?
Yeah.
So every day we have to know, we take that trailing indicator and say we did or we didn't. What are the leading indicators, right? So the leaders have to know how that boils down. And it's really boring, Justin. You just say the same thing every single day.
Yeah.
But after a while, people start to win, right?
Yeah.
All right, so the second thing is institutionalize the habits, right? So what are the habits that lead people to success? And what are they in your business? What are they for your role, right? So what's the habit of the CEO? What's the habit of his executive team? What do his managers have to do? Do all of those things tie together? Do we all believe the same thing? Or are we all doing different things, right? And then are you really consistent with your people?
Sorry, just a pause, just stop for a sec if I could. What is the example of a habit? How does that look like?
So for some people, it's mantras like be early to be on time, the whole Vince Lombardi thing, right? But habits are like every day. It's like what I tell salespeople is like every day you prospect, even if it's one person. Like if you ever lose that habit.
Yeah.
I listened to Max Lucado speak one time. Very prolific author, however many irrefutable laws of leadership he's up to, whatever. And he's making this point. He said, every day I read, every day I write, every day I file. Every day I read, every day I write, every day I file. Every day I read, every day I write, every day I file. And he said that about 15 times, and finally we all kind of got the message. And so it's what are those things? Like in any business, there are certain things that are the same, right? So if you're running the AR department, you better invoice every day.
Yeah.
Like I've been in companies where they just like didn't invoice for a week. That was a very bad deal, man.
Yeah,
right?
it sounds like a few companies I know, but yeah.
Right. There are these very basic things, but at a leadership level, it's like, hey, like you got to be really consistent with your one-on-ones. Hey, are you really consistent with your messaging? What does consistency mean? All right. I talked to a company the other day, and they were literally bickering over response time. I asked them, well, did anybody pick customer response time? Is it 3 minutes and 30 seconds? Is it six? Like, what's the
that's key.
It sounds simple.
No, that's super key right there. I actually want to even talk to that for a second. That's actually a great example of. I love that's kind of like the West is not a direction type thing, right? To say like we're challenged over this because that's a perception issue, and if not codified, then what is right and what is wrong? What are we actually arguing over? It was unacceptable to me. It was acceptable to you. It's completely subjective. So I think that's a great example. What does that actually look like, and what does success look like?
So somebody just make a decision, right? Like just make a decision.
Yeah.
Like one mantra that I've used in every single business is a customer never asks for updates.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? Well, it means if the customer has to ask you where the truck is, you failed.
Yeah.
We got Mac deployment, we got tracking, we got ELDs, like a customer never asks for updates. So it's meant to beg the question and say what then that's a habit. Our customers don't ask for updates. They know where their stuff is.
Yeah.
So that's an idea of habits. And then the other thing is the environment. The last thing is create the environment. So the leader's job is to create the environment for people to flourish.
If there's one thing you can't get me to do, it's to work for my family. This next episode is a fun one to listen to, as Justin interviews his partner, Jackie Myers, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting several times. Jackie is currently the managing partner of Mosaic's Logistics, but before Mosaic, she was the president of Myers Transport, a 90-year-old, fourth-generation, family-owned and operated LTL trucking company. During this episode, Jackie chatted with Justin about working in her family's trucking business, and in this particular clip, she shares some advice that she would give others who are also thinking about joining their family's business.
So, okay, going back in time, if you were to, we can sort of tell this story, you've probably told that story, 100 times, but was that the right decision to go into the family business? And I think maybe more specifically, what would you give to advice for people in terms of, sussing out if you should go work in the family business? So you've got a 28-year-old you. What are you telling you when you were 28? Knowing what you know now at I won't say.
Thank you. Well, keep in mind, I wasn't 28 when I joined the company, so I was 22, 23. I mean, being in a family business it can be a ton of fun. It can be wonderful opportunities that don't come up if you're not inside of a family business. I look back on my time at Myers, and although I never reported to my father, I worked with him basically every day. We were on the phone most days, and that's a lovely life experience to have, to be quote unquote forced to spend time with your father. And my father and I get along famously, and that was a highlight for me. So I really enjoyed that part of working in a family business. I think we'll dive into it in other areas, but there are lots of challenges of working in a family business too. And I think it's really important going in with your eyes wide open of who is currently in the family business, what are their goals and their dreams, what do they want from the next generation. I think it warrants a not just a chat, it warrants a lot of thought and open dialogue on where do we want to go and do I actually fit into this? I mean, I'm not sure if you want to go here now, but when I look back at my time at Myers Transport, when I joined the company, my cousin had already joined and she was firmly implanted in operations. That was her skill set. That's where she wanted to be. My father was retired, basically. I don't know if it was openly said that he was retired, but he had one foot well out the door, and he had always been in charge of sales and marketing. And so it was, this is the gap we have in our business. This is the gap that needs to be filled. We need an owner who's in sales. So great, I want to be in the company. I want to be a success. I will take over sales and marketing. That's the road I will go down. In hindsight, that wasn't the right way to do it, I don't think. My passion wasn't in sales. My skill set wasn't in sales. I should have been in operations, admin, finance. I should have been in a different part of the business, but that wasn't the opening at the time. So I think, advice to other, I was going to say young kids, but young adults entering a family business, I would really do some soul searching on your own of what do you love, what are you passionate about, what are you really good at? And does that fit into the family business? Can I fit my passion and my expertise into the business, or am I going to, I hate the saying, but am I going to be a square peg in a round hole? So I think it's really honest dialogue, and it's hard as a kid because you just think, I can be good at anything. As long as there's training, as long as there's help around me, I can be good at anything. Yeah, you can, but are you going to love it? Are you going to enjoy life? I look back on my time, I wouldn't change it for the world. I love the life that I have now. I love what I've created, and I wouldn't be here if I hadn't done all these things. Would I have done it a little bit differently? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jackie. You're the best, and I do make sure that Justin remembers it every day. In this next clip, we feature Jordan Graft, founder and CEO of Highway, a company focused on improving carrier identity. He chats with Justin about using carrier identity as a gateway to building connections between brokers and carriers.
What is the thing you're trying to solve at that higher level, or what's the end point to this? And I don't want to ask you to give up any trade secrets here, but look, I'm a big believer in that. As long as we're creating, we're not competing. So you may not follow that belief system, but I'm curious personally on where this goes from there, because it feels like a step, not an end point.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's break it down into identity and connection. So, Highway is carrier identity and connection for 3PLs and brokers. So in the identity piece, there's so much that there's so much excitement about what we can start to create around digital verification. You nailed it with KYC. I mean, that's deep in my background, right? Like JP Morgan and Triumph, like this idea of like KYC, know your customer. And what I think is fundamentally missing about the approach today is you use the same process for every carrier. And like that's, there's different processes, right? There's different levels of risk depending on the carrier profile. And so how can we tailor an experience that, say is different for a new entrant who entered, 3 months ago in the middle of a hot market, has never been inspected? That carrier's experience for claiming their digital identity should look different than someone that's got 20 trucks, been in business 30 years, has a massive digital footprint, and, is very verifiable. And so we are absolutely going to Flintstone that in the beginning, right? And like, okay, how can we in the background be churning in the background, developing manual process that eventually can be automated to start putting more behind the identity than just a DOT number. And that's ultimately where we want to go is like, is answer the question, who's really hauling your freight? And it's not just from a fraud perspective, right? Sometimes you get too caught up in like, okay, well, like putting all this pain and pressure on the carriers. It's also for the carrier's benefit. It's to secure the carrier's profile. As a carrier, I want to be able to say, here's my Highway profile. You can't get in it. The only person can get in it is me. It's protected by multi-factor authentication. It's protected by, me verifying that I have ownership of this entity and who I am. And because carriers get hacked a lot, these bad actors go after carriers because they're operating out of a Gmail, or they're operating out of a Yahoo account, and they're reusing username and password, and and it's a real thing. It's a real area where we want to help carriers. It's not just like, hey, how do we, help brokers weed out bad actors on the carrier side? It's like, how do we protect a carrier that's put his livelihood into this business and his sweat and tears? I mean, I identify with that with Vacay Foods, delivering the groceries myself. It's like, it would just be, it's the fear that someone's going to take this from me because they steal my email account password. Like, we got to give them more protection, that their identity is more sacred and protected by someone that cares about that being secure for them, than just like, okay, I filled out this packet and I entered a DOT number. No one verified who I was. I just did it. I can pretend to be anybody. That next step though, so now that if we can get this identity right, and we can answer the question, who's really hauling your freight? It's the beginning of the relationship. It's the beginning of the connection. That's the next part, the next phase. So can we take the existing systems of the carrier and bring those to bear at the beginning of the relationship? So, just like when you sign in with Google to an app like Calendly, and Calendly says, hey, we want access to your Google Calendar to create events and do all these cool things. We want to be able to, when a carrier signs it with a broker, say, hey, and their TMS is connected, and you can talk to them through, capacity tracking, onboarding. You can do all these communications of channels of communication through this TMS they're already using. So now you're talking about systems integration through this OAuth 2 protocol. And that can fundamentally change how brokers and carriers work and develop that trust and through this integration. And that to me is like the exciting part, is can we use identity as a gateway to building relationships through connection?
Whether you love it or hate it, social media is one of the most powerful tools you can use to communicate and connect with your customers, partners, and others in the trucking industry. In this episode, Justin chats with Kevin Huang, co-founder of Trucking Up, about the key differences between TikTok and other social media platforms, as well as the primary audience on TikTok in the transportation industry.
And I think that's kind of like what I did initially with TikTok. I was kind of embarrassed when I first started TikTok. I used like a anonymous email that I created separate from my personal email. I didn't use any like personal information because I didn't want my friends to see, kind of like what I was doing. Cause I think simply I was just like a little embarrassed and a little self-conscious when I first started TikTok experimentation. But actually without any connections, TikTok was able to quickly distribute my content to like truckers on TikTok by using the right hashtags, and following the right people, commenting on the right, kind of like right videos that quickly helped me distribute my content to basically all the truckers on TikTok. And that's like really how my content got picked up. So I think it's definitely like a very interesting distribution mechanism. In terms of the audience, I think this is also something really worth paying attention to. I think the majority audience, as far as freight goes, the majority audience that I notice on TikTok are drivers. It can be company drivers, it can be owner operators, it can be people that spend a lot of time on the road, because it's a great entertainment platform. When you're at the truck stops, maybe you have some time to kill. You can listen to podcasts, but you can also start to watch TikTok. Actually, when I visit truck stops, go into the break rooms, I actually see a good amount of drivers using TikToks just like in the break room, rather than watching TV and other form of entertainment. So I think it's definitely a really great platform for drivers themselves. So I think if you are, for example, a broker that are trying to recruit, owner operators, or if you're a fleet trying to recruit drivers, I think TikTok is actually a really good way to market and show off your business. But I think as far as maybe shippers, and if you're going as a freight broker is to recruit shippers, or if your goal is to for example reach fleet owners, I think maybe TikTok I would argue is probably not the best platform for that. But in terms of reaching drivers, I think it's actually really effective.
And we have time traveled into December. For our last episode of 2022, we had Benjamin Gordon, founder and managing partner of Cambridge Capital. Benjamin came on the show and chatted with Justin about mergers and acquisitions in the supply chain space, something that we're seeing and predicting more of. In this clip, Benjamin shares the current state of M&A and how it will affect the supply chain in the upcoming future.
It's an interesting time. From a macroeconomic perspective, we're finishing off 2022. We're just nearing the end for a timestamp here, and I think that as we sort of move into a more bearish or tepid market into next year, I'm really curious about how you're thinking about right now, the M&A space, and how things are changing, if they even are at all. So I'll kind of leave that a little bit open-ended, and would just love to hear some thoughts around M&A, particularly obviously in supply chain.
Yeah, well, the reality is that the M&A activity in logistics and supply chain is as high as it's ever been. How that translates into results may be different, but the interest levels are super high. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you look at the mega deals, I think you're going to see fewer mega deals in the next 6 months than you did last year and before, for a couple of reasons. One, valuations are down. Two, more importantly, the debt markets are down. So if you were going to make a $1 billion acquisition of a company last year, and you were going to, if the banks were willing to lend 6-7 times EBITDA, you'd pay 10 times EBITDA or maybe more, because you could borrow so much. Well, now you can't borrow as much, therefore you can't pay as much. And in some cases, the big deals just aren't getting done. But guess what? Most deals in logistics aren't $1 billion plus deals. So when you look at the mid-market, kind of deals in the $50 to $500 million value range, we see as much activity there as we did last year and the year before. In addition to that, on the venture side, yes, valuations are down. And yes, companies that remembered how high valuations were last year are now giving pause to going back to the capital markets and raising again. But guess what? Deals are still getting done. We're still investing. I mean, look, this year we invested in Bird, BYRD, which is a high growth software for e-commerce fulfillment powerhouse in Europe. Business grew nearly 3x last year, and it's continuing to grow this year. And we invested about $40 million in that business. So, and then similarly in the cold chain logistics and food logistics arena, we at Cambridge Capital invested in a recapitalization, bought a majority stake alongside management in a company called Boa Logistics, also just a few months ago. So, deals are still getting done. We're certainly still deploying capital. And I think while the mega deals may be on hold in the growth side of the world and the middle market side of the world, there's still lots of activity.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to our very special 2022 recap episode. I hope you had just as much fun as I did going over some of our favorite moments in the last year. We're so grateful to have all of our guests come on the show in 2022, and we cannot wait to see what 2023 has in store for us. To ensure you don't miss a future episode of Freight Famous, please subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcasting app. See you soon. See you next time. No.